How wrong were the media on Donald Trump? How wrong were they on the so-called Russian collusion or Russiagate? How wrong do they continue to be? And will they ever say sorry or pay a price? It is extraordinary, isn't it? Let me just remind you, as I've done before, with a little clip of the media frenzy, all misguided, on Trump and Russiagate.
Breaking overnight bombshell.
This is a very dramatic day, and I think it might be near a tipping point. Do you think this is a tipping point?
December 1st, 2017, you can mark it down. This is the day that everything changed.
The beginning of the end?
The beginning of the end.
The beginning of the end.
The beginning of the end.
The beginning of the...
We begin tonight with a bombshell.
Donald Trump is in a lot of trouble.
Trump is in trouble.
The president will resign.
Another hour, another bombshell.
This is a tipping point.
Trump's going down.
This president could be impeached.
Resignation.
I don't think this president is going to serve out his term.
Mr. Trump will not serve out his term.
He will not serve out his term.
No way. No how.
Breaking news.
Absolute bombshell.
Donald Trump is not. He's done. And it's over.
It's over.
The wall's closing in.
The wall's closing in.
This is going to be the Achilles heel.
Breaking news tonight.
I expect Trump to depart.
This week will be the watershed week.
Trump is in big trouble.
Trump's in a lot of trouble.
It's a sign of a terrified old man who feels the
walls
Closing in.
The walls
are increasingly
Closing in on him.
tonight. The walls
are closing in.
today changed everything. This is the beginning of the end.
Today, the biggest
Tipping point for the Trump administration.
What a historic day. The bombshells.
He's underwater. He feels
The walls closing in. Turning point.
we may be at a tipping point.
It's the beginning of
The end.
The beginning
of the end.
Another bombshell.
Bombshell. Bombshell. Bombshell.
Bombshell.
Bombshell.
Bombshell.
Bombshell. Honestly, if it wasn't so serious, this would be absolutely hilarious, wouldn't it? And as I've shown you before, our own ABC still insists the war is not lost. Even after the Mueller report ruled out collusion, the national broadcaster pressed ahead with its podcast, Russia, If You're Listening.
Mueller's investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired with the Russian government, and that's making Donald Trump very happy.
I'm having a good day, too. It was called No Collusion, No Obstruction.
But did he obstruct justice? Well, according to, literally half of the report that I have sitting in front of me, kinda yes.
Now it's kinda yes on obstruction. That is alleged obstruction of an inquiry that found there was nothing to cover up. Sounds more like a niet to me. That's a kinda fail, an absolute humiliation for much of the media. Their partisanship, their pack mentality and their misleading of audiences has been laid bare, hasn't it? Have they apologised? Niet. Have they paid a price, learned the error of their ways, improved their reporting? Niet, niet, niet. One person who's been writing about this clearly and dispassionately in the US is Aaron Mate at The Nation. I Skyped him earlier today. Aaron, thanks for joining us. Russiagate, people continue to talk about it, but it's dead, finished, gone, hasn't it?
You can say that the underlying conspiracy theory that Trump and Russia colluded is dead in the water, but somehow it does remain a topic of discussion. Just last week, Lawrence O'Donnell, the popular MSNBC host, reported this bombshell claim that Russian oligarchs had signed bank loans for Donald Trump. He said, though, that this was based on a single source that hadn't seen the bank loans themselves. And then based on that very thin sourcing and a backlash that included Trump threatening to sue him, he had to apologize and retract his story. So even those who peddled the conspiracy theory are still finding ways to revive it. But as the Lawrence O'Donnell story signified, it's harder to maintain it, a lot harder than it was before.
There's obviously a political context here. There's obviously political enemies of Donald Trump have pushed this from the get-go. But if we focus on the media, what do you think is it that's been driving the media? Every new development is a bombshell. Every new development is going to lead to impeachment. There's been such a bloodlust to get Trump over the so-called Russiagate scandal, obviously in the US, but it's been reflected in our own publicly funded media in Australia. What do you think's driving it?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. For one, it's been great for ratings. I mean, every night you're selling the public this real-life spy thriller where the president of the United States is possibly compromised or conspiring secretly with the Kremlin. So it's exciting, and people have been hanging on to the edge of their seats as if they're watching a real life spy thriller. Of course, that required violating, every basic principle of journalism possible, because there was always the countervailing evidence that showed all this to be a farce, but that was just ignored. So it's been unfortunate, but that's really how it went. So there's ratings, it's been profitable. There's also this real hatred for Donald Trump, which, personally, I can sympathize with anybody who doesn't like Donald Trump. I'm not a fan of Trump myself. I don't want him to be president. But, in the process, if you're a professional journalist, that doesn't justify, acting like children who believe in Santa Claus, which is really what this whole Russiagate thing was. It was this fantasy that Trump was engaged in a secret plot with the Kremlin and that Robert Mueller was going to uncover it and prove it. So you have a combination of many things, none of which have ended up making the media look very good.
I wonder to what extent that is also motivated by revenge. That is, that so many in the media were so convinced that Donald Trump could not win, and then he won. So perhaps the next best thing is to prove that they might have been right in the first place, is to prove that he was illegitimate.
I think that's a great point. I think a lot of this Trump-Russia stuff has been a resistance to the reality that Trump won, and nobody saw it coming. As you say, everybody, including myself, by the way, didn't think he had a chance. But in the process, that required sort of ignoring large parts of the country that were fed up with this system. And the problem is, for the corporate media, which is very much enmeshed in the U.S. power structure, Trump's victory was a rebellion against that power structure. And so they want any way to avoid dealing with that reality. And one of the convenient ways was to think that this was a result of some secret conspiracy with Russia, which would all go away once Robert Mueller uncovered it. But that was a fantasy. And so like any fantasy, you have to have a moment when reality sinks in. And I think right now, in the aftermath of Mueller's investigation, no indictments for a Trump-Russia conspiracy, no evidence of a Trump-Russia conspiracy. And we had just not too long ago Robert Mueller's appearance before Congress, where he himself appeared to be unfamiliar with some of the key details of his own investigation. It's really lifted the mask off this whole thing.
Aaron, why have there been no repercussions for the media? Why have no media players or platforms really paid a price for getting it so wrong? Wrong about Trump's election chances and wrong about pushing the Russiagate conspiracy theories so long. When it's been demonstrated that they were wrong, they don't seem to have paid a price at all.
No, I think it highlights a really unfortunate dynamic we have, at least in the U.S. media, which is that even if you don't do your job and you fail at your job egregiously, you're still not punished, and you're in fact still rewarded if you serve a narrative that is convenient for powerful interests. So take, for example, the Iraq War. We were sold a lie that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and that he was working with al-Qaeda. Well, none of the people who pushed that, with a couple of exceptions, suffered consequences. In fact, many of the people who promoted it were given promotions themselves. So, for example, Jeffrey Goldberg, he wrote some influential pieces for the New Yorker magazine way back when, alleging some secret dealings between Saddam Hussein and al-Qaeda. Well, where is he now? He's the editor of one of the most prestigious magazines there is, The Atlantic. So in the U.S., there unfortunately aren't consequences. There not only are not consequences for egregiously failing, they're in fact rewards for doing so. And I think you're seeing that same dynamic play out now. There's just a refusal to hold anybody accountable because the media in many ways acts as conveyor belts for certain privileged interests, and they protect their own interests themselves.
Well, like politicians, the media are struggling to maintain the trust of the public. Shouldn't one of the ways to deal with that, one of the ways to build up trust, to apologise and correct when you get things wrong? Has anybody actually apologised for getting Russiagate so horribly wrong?
Not that I've seen. Not that I've seen. And in fact, as we saw with Lawrence O'Donnell recently coming out and alleging falsely that Russian oligarchs signed Donald Trump's bank loans, we're seeing the people who are most responsible for this debacle doubling down on it. So not only are they not apologizing, they're actually continuing with the same kind of reckless behavior. It's really stunning to behold.
Aaron Mate, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.